good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to wherever you're joining us from around the world. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today and joining our webinar, The Truth About LED Technologies. This is a big one. We'll give it around 60 seconds, I think, for everyone to log in before we begin. But what I will do is go through some quick housekeeping bits to help you really get the most out of today's session. So the webinar will run for around 45, 50 minutes, although we have the most passionate people on this course, so that could be slightly longer. But we'll make sure that there is some dedicated time at the end to answer any questions that you have. So please feel free to submit your questions in the chat at any time, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end. Have your cameras ready as well, because there will be some QR codes shown on the screen throughout the session for you to access some additional resources, and also take a photo of any of the slides that you think would be really great to share with your network as well, and let people know that you've joined the webinar today. Today's session is being recorded, so you will be able to watch this back on the Dermalux Academy, and your team will be able to revisit that at any time. So let's see, do we have so many? Oh, we've got lots of people in now, and this is the bit where we get a bit nosy to see who's there. So do say hi. And what we'll do now is we will get started. I think this is a perfect place to start the conversation today, which of course is about LED technology. It is absolutely everywhere, yet different devices are getting wildly different results. And it's because most conversations, I think, about LED are happening at the surface level. So we're talking about the colours, we're talking about the claims, trends, but what we're not seeing, or we're not really talking about, is actually where, these results are determined, which is, of course, cellular biology, dose delivery, and the engineering precision of the devices. And we are at a tipping point. Mitochondrial dysfunction now underpins everything from inflammation, aging, pore healing, treatment resistance, and at the same time, LED has exploded in availability, but not really in the understanding. And it's the gap between, I think, the availability and the understanding, which is, really where these outcomes start to be inconsistent, and why clinics are really confused with where to invest. So the question: can this LED system, this is what we should be asking now, can this LED system reliably deliver the biological dose required to drive change every time? And at the end of today's session, you will be able to have the answer to that question. What are we going to cover? Well, we're firstly going to look at the biology, what actually drives the cellular response, what our cells even respond to and why. Then the engineering, because even the best biology means nothing if the system can't deliver the right dose, and can't do it that accurately and consistently. And then finally, the clinical conversation, which is where that becomes, more practical and allows us to deliver the very best results for our clients when we understand the biology and the engineering. So let me introduce you, though, to our guest speakers today. It is a privilege always to introduce Dr. Pablo Naranjo. Dr. Pablo is one of Europe's, or the world's, I would say, leading experts in aesthetic medicine, laser technologies, with over 20 years of hands-on experience as medical director of Elite Laser Clinic in Spain. His work has been recognised with more than 20 professional awards. And when we're discussing the science behind LED, behind light, mitochondrial function, clinical translation, there is truly no one better to lead this conversation. So welcome, and it's really great to have you. We also have our very own Ben Rawlins, so Head of Research and Development here at Dermalux. Ben is an award-winning designer with an advanced expertise in device testing, optical engineering, regulatory compliant development, all the fun stuff. And Ben and his team specializes really in translating that photobiology into precise, reliable, and clinically led technology. And in an industry often driven now by those surface level claims that we mentioned before, Ben brings the engineering clarity to define what truly drives that consistent and measurable result when we use LED phototherapy. And then finally, let me introduce myself. I'm Melissa Williams. I head up the global education here at Dermalux. I've spent over 23 years within the industry, and I lead the Dermalux Academy globally. And this is where we train clinicians across multiple markets in how to integrate LED phototherapy safely, effectively, and profitably, very important, into the practice. And today, my role is to help connect the science that we're going to hear and the engineering with how and what that actually means for your treatment room, your team, and the supports that the tools, sorry, that we have that can support you. So I'm now going to pass over to Dr. Pablo. Let's begin. Really important that we understand, to get the best LED result, we have to start with the science, the light, its wavelength, the energy. This is only important when it creates that change within the cells. So it's this cellular response which is where the story really begins. So Pablo, over to you.
So thank you very much, Melissa, for this introduction. So I'm Pablo Naranjo from Madrid, from Spain. I will try in the next 25 minutes to share my experience, not just on treatments, protocols with this amazing technology, but also on the basis of the physiology of how the light works and how we are able to interact and to modify the parameters to achieve the best results. So my experience with Dermalux is from probably since 10 years ago. I had 4 3-wave in my clinics, and we work daily with them. So it's a device, all of them, the 4 3-waves, we work around 13 hours per day with them. So they can work standalone or in synergy with any other protocol we have in the clinic. And you will quickly understand how interesting is this technology in our clinic. So when we talk about photobiomodulation, we talk about light and interaction with the tissue. So the light has been more studied in the history of medicine is the light emission diode, the LEDs technology. So how they work? So we emit photons who are going to interact with a structure. This structure is the mitochondria which is inside of our cells. So the industry who creates the energy in our cell is the mitochondria. And it's extremely important to be able to modulate the activity of the mitochondria. And when we say modulation, we are not talking about increasing or decreasing the activity. We are talking about putting the proper amount of activity in each one of the mitochondria of the cells in the tissue we want to treat. So this is the reason why we talk about modulation. So if we have hyperactivation, like in an inflammatory process, we need to decrease the activation. And if we have decrease of activation, because we have, for example, a tissue which is dependent on the thyroidal gland and we have an hypothyroidism, we will modulate the activity of the cell, no matter if we have a decrease of hormones in the metabolism of the patient. So when we talk about how we interact with the cell, we need to interact with an activation of the ATP, so an activation of the energy of the cell. But also, we are going to do other regulation. We are going to regulate the signaling pathways of the cell. We are going to regulate the inflammatory process and the immune response. We are going to interact with the oxidative stress balance. We are going to control the oxidative stress, which, as you know, responsible of the hyperactivation of the enzymes like hyaluronidase, who destroy the hyaluronic acid we create with other techniques and other protocols. So it's extremely important to modulate also this oxidative stress in all our tissues and by activating this mitochondria. We are going to control the repair and adaptation and resilience of the tissue. So if we have a tissue who is damaged and we have any kind of damage, we need to control the activation of the cells to repair the tissue in the shorter way and in the proper way. As you know, when we have a damage in the tissue, in the skin, because we have a scar, for example, we have a traumatic damage, we need to control the activation of collagen type 3 and collagen type 1. Collagen type 3 is the first one who will come to one of those diseases, of those trauma we create when we have a trauma in the skin. But if we don't have the proper transfer between collagen type 3 and collagen type 1, and we produce too much collagen type 3, we're going to achieve a tissue who is fibrotic, a fibrosis in the scar. So extremely important, not just to stimulate the cell, but to control the amount of collagen type 3 and collagen type 1 and the balance between both. And the activation of the mitochondria is in the basis of that. So it's no sense to do treatments for the rejuvenation of the skin without controlling this balance in our tissue. And aging trajectories, evidently. So we are assuming that the cell, the mitochondria, is not just in the basis of the production of ATP, but is in the basis of the activity of all our enzymes and all our interleukins and all the mediators we have in the cells to have a proper activity. So when we talk about mitochondria, we need to talk also about the center of the modern dermatology and regenerative medicine. And we see it in all the presentation we go to the Congress. So the question will be, how do we support mitochondria in a safety and efficacy and non-invasively to be able to work in a better way? So we can do many ways. We can do with chemical products. We can do in a mechanical way. We can do in a chemical way. But the way who has demonstrated to be less aggressive for the tissue, more stable and more natural is the biophotomodulation by LED technique. So LED technique is releasing photons who create an electromagnetic energy. Don't think about photons of laser like temperature. When we apply an electron a diode to do hair removal, we want to coagulate the melanin of the hair. When we apply a vascular laser like KTP laser, pulse dye laser, Nd:YAG laser, we want to coagulate to achieve 60, 65 degrees Celsius in the vessels to coagulate them, to be able to destroy the structure. Here, we are not talking about destruction of nothing. We are not talking about coagulation of nothing. We are not talking about heating of any structure. We are talking about modulating the electromagnetic energy that the cell and the mitochondria has to be able to activate them or reduce the activation if they are hyperactive. So the wavelength is the basis of it. The wavelength is the passport number of the light. And we determine now, if we look to the publications, there are three extremely important wavelengths for an LED technology: red light, infrared light, and blue light. And this is the reason why three-wave offers us the possibility to work with all of them together or separately, depending on the result we want to obtain in the tissue. At the end, with the light, we are going to interact with chromophores, like any other light emission. So we need to interact with chromophore, and light emission diodes has two chromophores. One is copper, the other one is hemoglobin. We cannot change the level of copper in our organism because copper is not something we can take orally without risk, but we can change the level of hemoglobin just creating inflammatory process. And this is the reason why this technology is so interesting after any of the treatments we do with chemical injections, with lasers, with radiofrequency, with peeling, because with all those technologies, we create inflammatory process, we create hypervascularization, we create augmentation of iron, augmentation of hemoglobin in the tissue. And this augmentation of hemoglobin creates much more chromophore for the light emission diodes. So let's move to the next one. So when we talk about photons and interaction with the mitochondria, sorry for that. I don't know why it's not changing. Okay, sorry. We are going to talk about the three most important wavelengths we are going to interact: the blue, the red, and the infrared. So as we say, they have different pathways to work. So when we talk about the red light works directly in the organelles of the cell. So those goes directly to the nucleus of the cell and activate the RNA messenger of the cell. This is direct activation by light we can see, like the blue or the red. When we talk about infrared light, sorry for that, it's not changing properly the slides. When we talk about infrared light, we are going to interact with the membrane of the cell. So with another part of the cell, and this is the reason why they are so synergic, both wavelengths. So sorry for that, Melissa, it's taking a lot of time to change the diapo. Sorry for that.
No, let me help you out here now. There we go.
If you can,
There we go.
okay. So
Here.
red light, we have many of them who red light is not just one wavelength. We can have red light with 600 nanometers, 615, 633, 650 nanometers. But the most studied wavelength for a late emission diode technology is 633. If you go to PubMed, is the most studied light, most studied wavelength we have in the market. But it's extremely to be a specific wavelength, not a range between 600 and 640. So we need to be in a proper red light emission. And 633 is proved to be the most efficacious one. Why? Because it's absorbed by the mitochondrial chromophores, copper and iron. It's rapidly increased the mitochondrial activity because it interacts directly with the nucleus and the organelles of the cell. And it triggers downstream nuclear signaling and gene expression changes. So it's the most important light we have in an LED. But we cannot forget infrared, near-infrared light. Near-infrared light 830 is the most studied one. Interacts with deeper tissue. So if we want to penetrate more, not just in a dermal layer, but in a subcutaneous layer, we need this kind of near-infrared light. This near-infrared light doesn't interact directly with the organelles and the nucleus of the cell. It interacts with the membrane of the cell. So this is the reason why it's so synergic. We can stimulate with red and infrared, and we are going to go with two different pathways to stimulate and to have the same action, but in two totally different pathways who are synergic between them. So combining the wavelength delivers much more complete biomodulation response. So red is more superficial, infrared is deeper. One stimulates much more the nucleus, the other one the membrane of the cells. Both together achieve much better results. And we have more than 1,000 clinical validation in PubMed talking about the synergies of wavelength of the light emission diodes. So again, we are not talking about something which is new in the market. It's the most studied way of delivering light we have in the market. It's the most serious one and the one who is really proved by the clinical study we have in PubMed. So we are going to talk about a few cases. So what can we do with those lights? So one of the big applications we have is acute acne. So in acute acne, we have the hypersecretion, just come back to the previous one, we have hypersecretion of the sebaceous gland, and we can control the secretion of the sebaceous gland and the diameter of the sebaceous gland with the proper wavelength. We are going to control the inflammatory process and the hypervascularization we have in the area. And we are going to control the amount of bacteria we have in the skin. So controlling them with the blue acting directly through the bacteria, the red activating the metabolism, and the infrared reducing the inflammatory process. With those three wavelengths, we are going to control very well the acute acne. It doesn't mean you cannot mix with other techniques we already have in our clinics, oral, topical, or even with EBDs, other EBDs. But the key for the treatment in our clinic of acne is the combination of light emission diodes, so the true wave, with the oral or topical medication. So how many sessions a patient like this one can take? Minimum 6, maximum 12 or 15. It depends on how the degree of acute acne the patient has. But the number of sessions per week normally is 2 at the beginning, and we can then, after a few sessions, move to 1 per week. And the amount of time we're going to need to control this acne is around 3 months. So 2 to 3 months of activation and control of the inflammatory process and the vascularization by this device. When we talk about wound healing, we talk, of course, about one of the techniques which is already more proven in PubMed. We are talking about large number of sessions, an average of 2 sessions per week, doing a minimum of 2-3 months. So we can evidently combine with epidermal growth factors, with exosomes, with the PRP. We can combine with any other regular protocol we have to close the trauma and to enable the skin to be in the perfect conditions. But standalone, and those patients have been treated only with light emission diode by 3-wave. Standalone, the technique works. It takes a bit more time than if we combine with other techniques, but standalone, it works. The amount of time, as you have seen in acne and in wound healing, is around 20 minutes of application. We don't need more. The device is extremely powerful, and with 20 minutes is enough, even if the phototype is high. because, as you know, in high phototypes 4, 5, 6, we have the light doesn't penetrate as much in the skin due to the barrier of the melanin, which is also absorbed by those wavelengths. So in higher phototypes, we need a bit higher amount of time. And this is the reason why we talk about 20 minutes, because lighter skin needs much lower time of application of the device. So wound healing, acne, when we talk about trauma, like post-surgery hematomas. So if we leave the patient alone, probably this hematoma will take between 7 and 10 days to be reabsorbed. And in only 3, 4, 5 days, we can have a total reabsorption of this hematoma. In my experience, applying 2 sessions per week, 2, 3 sessions per week, in just less than 1 week, we control totally the hematoma. And since the first application, there is a dramatic reduction on the hematoma of the patient. So when we do a treatment and we ask the patient to come back in 1, 2 days to do the next session, the patient comes with much less hematoma. We apply not just in post-surgical, but for example, when we apply botulinum toxin or fillers, and we create in a filler with a filler some hematoma in around the lips in a lip treatment, many times we have those hematoma. We control immediately with the 3-wave device, immediate application after the treatment, and then we ask the patient to come after 2 days to do a second application. And normally with only 2 applications, we control the hematoma or we have in the lip area after an injection of hyaluronic acid. But extremely important technology for post-surgery and in dermatology. Which one is the most common treatment we do in dermatology? Probably inflammation, rosacea, acne, acute acne, inflammatory reaction. So all those treatments are the basis of the day per day treatment in our clinic. When we talk about vascular and inflammatory process, we need to differentiate between red and infrared color. Infrared will be much more efficacy on inflammatory process, like a dermatitis. In the other side, if we have a rosacea without any kind of inflammatory process, red color will be much more efficacy. So depending on if we have excess of vessels, excess of inflammatory process, or both, we are going to choose one, the other wavelength, or both together. In this case, it was a patient with rosacea, acne rosacea. She has both conditions, excess of vessels and excess of inflammatory process, and the combination of red 633 nanometers and infrared 830 was the key of the treatment. 2 treatments per week, doing 6 to 8 weeks, and the results obtained are amazing. Again, if you want to combine with any other protocol you have in your clinic, the result will be achieved in shorter times, but standalone, the device works. So you can have access now to this. If you take this barcode with your mobile, you have access to this publication, which is extremely interesting, talking about the management of rosacea in just in 6, 8 sessions of treatment, 2 per week, and with the basis of treatment of red and infrared lights. So wavelength alone isn't enough, evidently. Light is enough to obtain good results, but if we combine, we can have even better results. Wavelength enables the interaction. It does not determine the outcome. The outcome depends on 2 things: the dose of delivery in the tissue and the consistency of this delivery. That means if we overdose, we are going to have less results than if we put the proper dose. This graphic is interesting. So when we talk about putting the precise amount of energy to achieve the precise result with the precise wavelength, so this is extremely important. So the absorption becomes inconsistent, and the signaling becomes inconsistent, and the outcomes varies if the delivery of the wavelength is not the proper one. So we need to choose the proper device with the proper chromophore with the proper time to achieve the expected result. So how we calculate that? So the company, Melissa and his team has done an amazing job putting extremely good parameters in the device. So the pre-settings have been decided not just by the company, but of a large group of doctors who collaborate with the team, with Melissa team, to achieve protocols who are specific and efficacy in each one of the cases. So what they calculate? They calculate the dose per treatment. Dose is irradiance in a certain time. So the amount of energy, but the time of delivery of this energy is also important. Not to put shorter time than necessary or excess of time, because in both cases we have less result than the expected one. So how to do that? So extremely important. As I say, if you put too much energy, too much time or too much energy, you enter in a catabolic phase. And if you put too short time or too short energy, you are not in the peak of the anabolic phase. So to be in the perfect threshold, in the perfect equilibrium of time and dose, we need to take care of those presetting parameters depending on the chromophore, on the phototype of the patient, the pathology, the deepness of the pathology we want to treat. So the amount of chromophore and the deepness of the chromophore we want to treat. So the biological response occurs when we have sufficient photons to reach the cellular chromophore, so absorbed by the chromophore in the proper penetration, in the proper deepness. Energy is delivered within an effective dose window, so not too less, not less and not excessive dose that the one we really need for the treatment, and exposure is sustained long enough to trigger signaling. So there is a minimum of time of application, but there is also a maximum of time after what we reduce the efficacy of the treatment. So at the end, fluence, joules per centimeter square, is the basis of the treatment. No matter if we talk about light emission diodes, like those ones, like the LEDs from 3-wave Dermalux, or with any other laser. So the key is the proper amount of energy in the proper penetration to achieve the chromophore we want to interact with. So again, peak of stimulatory effect. So doses are depending on energy and time. So don't put too much time. Don't put 20 minutes to a patient who needs 10, because the result will be better in 10 minutes. And don't do extremely short treatment without the proper energy, because we are not going to achieve the biological effect you want. So this is totally proof. So equilibrium between energy and time will determine the efficacy of the treatment. And again, the parameters, presetting parameters the company has set in the device 3-wave are extremely well determined, thanks to this experience of thousands of doctors in the world working with the device in a daily way. So when we talk about precision and adaptability, we need to take care about many things. Firstly, how the range of delivering of each one of the LEDs. So it's a cone of delivering of light can be smaller or larger, depending on that, and depending on density of light emission diode per centimeter square, and depending on the distance between those LEDs and the skin, we are going to have a total amount of joules per centimeter square. So the quality of the emission of the LED, the range of opening of radiation of each one of the LEDs, the distance between each one of the LEDs, and the distance between the LED and the skin is going to determine the activation. And this is extremely important because all those parameters are preset in the device, and the company took care of all of them to try to achieve the best result in each one of the treatments. So vascular, inflammatory, infections, skin rejuvenation, all of them has different timings, different dosage, and different parameters. So if those drives the biology, how reliable can deliver it? So there are questions that many times should be replied by other specialists. So in this case, we have Ben Rawlings, who is engineer of the company, who can perfectly explain us why the way of delivering, why the way of cooling, because we didn't talk about cooling, but it's also extremely important. So after a few minutes of activation of those light emission diodes, the heating inside the device is going to stop the activation and the biological effect of the light. So the way the device refrigerate inside is going to determine if we can do one after the other one, different treatments. And if we can do a long treatment of 20 minutes, or after 5 minutes, the device is going to light, but it's not going to have any kind of biological effect. So the answer to those questions, so how to determine if a light emission diode has a good quality or not, how to determine if it's able to work doing 10 hours per day, or after a few minutes, the device is not anymore has not anymore the ability to stimulate the tissue. So we need an engineer, and of course, Ben should be the proper one to reply to those questions.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Pablo. And yeah, I find that so interesting to listen to as well. So that was awesome. Yeah, no, thank you, everyone. My name's Ben. I'm the head of R&D at Dermalux, and it's quite fun to be invited onto one of these things because I feel like me and Melissa talk about this sort of stuff on like a daily basis. We just kind of like nerd out on the things. But I think as Pablo quite expertly just discussed, then obviously we're designing devices that are going to interact with the biology fundamentally, and so as it says here, the biology sets the rules, and we've got to make a machine that can interact with the biology of the skin properly, and drive the outcomes that we want, based on all of the elements that Pablo talked about. So I think when we design a device at Dermalux, we're trying to look at the kind of the first principles of kind of what are we trying to achieve. And there's kind of two main things really. We need to understand kind of the parameters of the light itself, and then obviously the biology that we're interacting with. And so I thought I'd start with just like a quick kind of briefing on like, I suppose, what is light, and it's something that we have to think about quite a lot. And so when we talk about wavelength, we are essentially talking about the frequency of the light. So light is both a photon and it travels as a wave. And so what our eye perceives as color is the frequency of that light. But what's quite interesting is it also equates to the energetic value of the light. So when we look at lower wavelengths, so looking at blue, which might be the 415, which is what we use, and we got to red and we got to near infrared, the wavelength is getting longer. But by default, also the energetic value of that light is getting less and less. And that really plays a role in like how that can interact with the skin and how it can get into the tissue. So on a basic level, which you'll probably see quite a lot, you'll see like a really basic diagram like this, which will sort of show that blue light will hit the epidermis layer of the skin, red light will get down a bit further, near infrared will get further than that. But the reality is what it actually looks like is a little bit more complex. We can go to the next one. And so what's actually happening is when we're applying light to the skin, we're looking, essentially light can do one of three things. It can scatter, it can absorb, or it can reflect. And so when we're using a high energy light, like the blue light, the frequency and the energetic value of that light is so high that it cannot penetrate into the skin, or not very far. And the reason being is it interacts with matter just like that much more viciously. So I like to think of it as like if you were playing with a pinball machine and you fired that ball in and it was bouncing around, if that ball went in there really, really fast, it's going to have a lot more kind of interactions on a high speed, bounce all over the place. Whereas if you were able to fire that ball in much more smoothly, you'd be hitting off things, but it would go in just a lot smoother. And so what that means when we're applying light into the skin itself is that highly energetic light, it struggles to get past that kind of epidermal layer. When we then look at something like red light, which is slightly longer wavelength still, we can get a little bit deeper into the dermis, where we're interacting with the fibroblasts, looking at collagen and elastin. And then when we're looking at near infrared, because that wavelength is so much longer, it's less energetic, we're able to penetrate even further still. And obviously we're able then to kind of interact with chromophores that are just that much deeper into the skin. And so anyone who's potentially worked with lasers and that sort of stuff in the past will have probably seen a graph like this before, which is essentially kind of the main chromophores that exist within the skin. And so what's for us when we're trying to get light to the cells of mitochondria, these in many ways are like obstacles that we need to get through. And it's almost as if you could take the mitochondria away from the skin, like magically, somehow, like some degree of light would probably have an effect regardless of the wavelength. We have peak absorptions, but like to some degree the light would have a stimulatory effect. And so when you look at kind of these kind of chromophores that will absorb light as the light makes its way through the skin, you kind of see that you got hemoglobin, oxygen hemoglobin, melanin, and when you get to around the sort of 600 to 1,000 nanometer mark, you actually have kind of an optical window there for light to penetrate into the body and into the skin. As you get past sort of 1,000 nanometers, we're getting more and more absorption by by water, so we actually see less penetration. But you can also see on the blue light spectrum, because there's so much more absorption on the kind of more surface level stuff like the melanin. We have we're getting much less kind of penetration into the skin, and a lot more of that energy gets much more kind of densely confined into the upper layers of the skin. And so that's why kind of when you look at blue light specifically, sitting sort of just outside the UV range, we're essentially doing that kind of destructive element of breaking down the DNA inside the bacteria and what's so effective for things like acne and wound care. Whereas when you're looking at more of the photobiomodulation wavelengths, kind of the red to the near infrared range, we're seeing, it's a much more kind of gentle process on the skin. And so again, I always like to think of it as kind of turning a dial. So as you're turning the dial of your wavelengths, the energetic value of that light gets less and less, but also your ability to penetrate and get further into the body gets more and more. But that's obviously up to a limit. We'll be getting into more absorption by water. So as probably most people watching this webinar will know, that we have kind of three key wavelengths, which Pablo touched on, which are, fundamentally they're the most kind of studied and efficacious wavelengths that there are, which are, we use 415 for the blue light, 633 for the red, and 830 for the near infrared. And so again, what we're trying to achieve with each one of these wavelengths is kind of fundamentally different things because of the properties of the light itself. So 415, again, high energy, high surface scattering, high surface interaction, kind of a lot of reflection and a lot of energy that builds up on the surface of the skin. Again, we're sitting just outside the UV range, so we're non-ionizing, we're not causing any kind of fundamental damage to the skin itself, but it's high enough energy to where we can really be destructive to the bacteria on the surface. 633, again, we're getting into the kind of, we're slightly less energetic, but it means we can penetrate deeper into the body. And so we've got a medium frequency, moderate energy, and that's why we can get into the dermis and do some really good things in there. And then equally, as we get into near infrared, we're getting much deeper penetration. We're interacting with different chromophores. We're getting much more absorption by less absorption by hemoglobin. We're seeing more vasodilation and obviously the benefits from the kind of the inflammatory markers. And so I put this slide in as it's intentionally a little bit kind of over dramatic, but it's sort of typical of what you see on sort of cheaper devices, which is if you're looking at the big kind of sort of red light therapy panels and that sort of thing, is that they might say that we've got several peak wavelengths within the machine, and what you see here is actually quite a broad distribution of light with certain peak wavelengths dotted in within there. But what that means is that you are getting a high kind of energetic value of that wavelength, but the distribution of that light, the like how far spread that is quite broad. And so what it means is that less of that light is targeted around the target wavelength that we want for optimal penetration and to maintain as much energy as we can into the skin. So as soon as we get into the skin, we know that the light will scatter and we'll kind of diffuse and lose energy. But the more focused we can be on the target wavelength itself, the more we can be specific and energetic when we get to the target chromophores we want to hit to elicit mitochondrial function. And so this is typically kind of what our wavelengths will look like and how we engineer them. And so what you can see is we've got a peak wavelength, similar to the other companies. We control that to plus or minus 2 nanometers. But I think the thing you'll find with a lot of companies, and no one really talks about this, is it's the distribution of the waveform itself. So we control it to what's called narrowband waveforms. And so what we're doing is we're controlling what's called the full width half max of the waveform, which is essentially the midpoint of the wave. It dictates how broad that light is distributed. And so typically what that means is that while we're getting a really high energetic value in the peak wavelength, we're also controlling how much of that light is actually funneled up into that peak wavelength. And it means that when we say we're targeting 633 nanometers, the vast majority of that light is 633 nanometers, and we're controlling it to a very, very precise amount. So we just go on to the next slide. We do external third-party testing on all of our devices, but we also have the internal capability to test and validate our devices. It's a big part of how we design and develop the products. And so this is an actual reading that we've taken from one of our devices. And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of throw it in there. So we have a calibrated spectral radiometer that we use within the company. And what you can see here is just real life reading of what these peak wavelengths look like and how the light is kind of distributed into a narrow band. Because the wavelengths get longer, it tends to be harder to control as you get into longer wavelength forms. So the near infrared is a touch wider, but we're still trying to control that full width half max of the light as to the best we can, so that we are we're getting a high energetic value into the skin. Vast majority of that light is of the target wavelength, and we're hitting those target chromophores that we need to hit to elicit the cellular response. So how do we do that? So obviously it starts with the LED, and so we have a very specific specification of the LED that we've developed, and we go through a process called binning. So whenever we manufacture a run of LEDs, we essentially, every single LED on an automatic kind of real basis will be individually tested. So every single LED, and we'll be checking for things like the wavelength accuracy, the level of radiance, that full width half max measurement, and then a bunch of other electrical parameters like the forward voltage and stuff like that. But fundamentally, we are tolerancing those LEDs to good, bad, and essentially only the ones that fall within our target parameters will go into the device. The other ones get binned off and they get used in other people's products. But we have a very specific requirement for what goes into a Dermalux device. So once we get that into the product, as Pablo touched on, thermal regulation is probably one of the most important elements of how we ensure consistency of the output of the LEDs. And so heat is fundamentally the enemy of almost any electronic component, but very specifically to the performance of LEDs. So if we see a buildup of heat within an LED that's beyond a certain limit, we can see and we can measure deviations in peak wavelength accuracy, and we can see a massive deviation in power. And so we spent a lot of time on LED cooling, and it comes from a combination of the actual kind of LED specification itself and how we draw the heat away from the LED into the board, but then also how we kind of pull it away from the board and dissipate that heat away. And fundamentally, like it's just the most important element of how we ensure the consistency of the device from minute 1 to minute 20 of the treatment, but also throughout the lifespan of the device. And so if an LED system is cooled properly throughout the lifespan of its device, you shouldn't really see any kind of meaningful degradation within a window of, say, 15, 20 years or something, because as long as the LEDs are cooled and are operating at appropriate temperatures, we can ensure the consistency of the output. And so when you combine that with the specification we've developed and then controlling that properly, we get a really consistent, accurate light output, which is obviously fundamental to what we're trying to do. So next, when it comes to the actual kind of mechanics of the LED itself, oftentimes you'll see kind of broad spectrum, no lensing on an LED, and typically what that outputs is 120-degree cone. And what I've tried to illustrate here with the diagrams is that what we're essentially doing by lensing the LEDs down to 30 degrees is what we do, is we're taking all of that energy that's been sort of spread outwards and we're pulling it all in, and essentially we get a lot more kind of intensity at the skin surface. The reason that's important is that we're getting power for efficiency. So for the heat trade-off of running those LEDs, we're getting more photons on the surface of the skin that can then go in, obviously, and do what they need to do. The other element that, as I touched on, again, is the heating element. And so when you see multi-chip LEDs, so like they might have 3 or 4 wavelengths packaged into a single LED, when you start to run those on higher power, it's less from low power, but on higher power, essentially those LEDs are those kind of LED wavelengths, those chips that are within a single chipset, are going to kind of compete with each other. And the problem with that is that you've got to kind of heat sink and get rid of all of the heat that was within a single chipset. And obviously what we're doing is we're putting per LED is only a single wavelength. So we're able to drive that LED and get maximum efficiency for the heat trade-off. Less of a problem when you're on sort of lower power devices, but specifically when we're looking at big high power devices, it starts to become a really important factor. And so we see kind of dysregulated wavelengths, dysregulated power. And I think the important thing for Dermalux devices is that they perform the same on minute 1 as they do on the end of a treatment, which is really important. So then when we come to looking at the kind of the application of the light onto the surface of the skin, again, Pablo touched on this, the kind of the patination of the LEDs is really important. So a lot of the time, companies will measure an LED at like the power up of an LED at kind of a point blank range. That is a useless number to us. We want to know how much of that light is going to hit the surface of the skin. And so we back calculate the distance to the skin, and we're able to measure the irradiance, so the amount of photons that are hitting the skin at one time, which is kind of like your power reading, if you like. And so what we do is we patinate the LEDs to make sure that the 30-degree cones we've designed overlap, and we get a nice consistent illumination of the skin surface. And I think the important thing to say is that like mitochondria are in practically every cell in the body and in big volumes. And so when we come to interacting with those mitochondria, which are essentially looking to kind of absorb and interact with that light, getting good consistency across the skin becomes really important. Like we know mitochondria kind of talk to each other and they signal, but the application locally is a really important factor. Is that that's where you'll see the biggest and most kind of dramatic results. So then finally, when we come on to kind of the level of incidence, sorry, let's just go back one. Sorry, the level of incidence on the skin, the kind of the acuteness of the angle in which the light hits the skin is also really important. So this is where the 30-degree cone element really helps, because you can imagine if that surface of the skin was a mirror and you were to angle the light, it would bounce away. And so the more we can control the angle of the light hitting the skin, the less kind of reflection we'll get. Obviously determined by things like the texture of the surface and all that sort of stuff all plays a part. But broadly speaking, the more acute we can make that angle as it hits the skin, the more kind of penetration we'll get into the skin and less reflection. And so obviously that's kind of how we do it. But fundamentally, the one kind of quite unique thing about Dermalux is we do everything under one roof in Warrington in the UK. And so everything from my team designing the products to our production team, which are brilliant, and then we have a full in-house QC. We're fully regulated to basically every kind of medical device standard you can think of. We get audited a lot, which is great fun. But fundamentally, every device that we design and we build goes through a full inspection where we're checking the light output, we're checking the thermal performance, we're checking all of the mechanical integrity of the device. And it's really important to us because we want to make sure that whatever we send out there is going to work and it's going to be the same across any device that leaves our building. And so, I won't bore you with all the specifics, but, we spend a lot of time quality checking the products and making sure they're performing exactly correctly. And we get audited on that. So anything we do say, we have to actually kind of back up. Otherwise, the medical device police come knocking. So finally, just to summarize, essentially, what goes into designing a Dermalux device is optical consistency and dosage. So as Dr. Pablo said, if we're not hitting the right wavelengths, we're not hitting the right power parameters, we're not cooling the LEDs sufficiently, we're not eliciting response in the skin. So that's critical. It's accuracy more than power. And obviously with that, we're using the most clinically validated wavelengths, and we keep up to date with the literature on that. We're always trying to be state of the art. So anytime there's a change in the literature, we're reviewing that, seeing how that impacts our devices. At the moment, we know that we're using the most clinically validated wavelengths, and obviously, Dermalux sees the results off the back of that. And obviously, you have the kind of the electrical and mechanical parameters of ensuring that spacing of the LEDs, ensuring they're thermally controlled, and then we've got a uniform delivery across the skin. So we're irradiating the surface of the skin, the cells in a nice, consistent manner, and we're eliciting that response, across the area we're eliminating. And then finally, the one thing I really wanted to talk on before I hand back to Melissa is the kind of the versatility of the device. And again, Pablo touched on this, which I think is really important, is that every patient that comes to use one of these devices will have certain parameters of their skin that are different. It might be their skin type, it might be the age, it might be the condition of the skin. And I think an unsung element of the devices that we really put a lot of time and effort into is allowing that device to be versatile. So if someone has a level of sensitivity in the skin, you might want to turn the red down, up the infrared, and having that ability to kind of customize what you're doing depending on what you see. And this is where I think kind of having a basic understanding of the physics and what a wavelength is and what the energetic value is becomes really important, because you can start to understand, all right, if I wanted to get into this layer of the skin, what wavelength would I use? And if I was concerned about overloading the skin or something to that effect, kind of know what's happening. And so there's all of that kind of user interface element, I think, becomes quite important in making this clinically a useful tool. And then obviously we've tried our best really to design the device to be really user friendly, and things like the mechanical arm and how close you get to the skin. We've really tried to take away all the kind of the like the use problem or the barriers to use as best we can, so that when you look at the arm, for example, it can go in any which way direction you want, and it tends to be overlooked, but I think that's a really important part of how you deliver this treatment in all honesty. But yeah, so passing that back to Melissa, obviously she's now going to talk about how you go about using these devices in clinics, and how you can optimize using these for protocols over a long term.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ben. And thank you so much, Dr. Pablo. I mean, the geeks and the nerds of us must be very happy right now. That is a lot of incredible information. And, we've heard now about the science, and we've heard about the engineering and why LED works and why results differ really between other systems now. We understand that. My role is just to take a couple of minutes to translate that into what it actually means for your clinic and for your team and for your patients. So we know now from Dr. Pablo, the biology defines what is needed. We know the target we need to reach. We know how that interacts with light. We know the engineering of those devices determines whether that is delivered or not. And now it's the way the system is set up, the clinical system, in terms of how we use it. So when a device is engineered around the biology requirements, which is what we've just covered, dose, accuracy, stability, the uniform energy delivery, it then stops the device becoming a fixed output treatment. So which you'll see across many LED devices, one size seems to fit all. But we want to take away from that, because we want it to become a clinical platform. So no matter who walks in your door, you have a treatment plan for them. And that shift from a fixed output to this clinical platform is really what is important here. Because I guess in practice it means two things. Firstly, more predictable patient outcomes. Secondly, we have a system that can be used repeatedly commercially, because we know that consistency builds that trust, the retention, long-term value in clinic, and that is what really drives the versatility, the ability to be able to adapt the treatment based on the skin type, condition, inflammatory state, clinical response, and the way that the systems are set up are to allow you to do that in the optimal biological window, which we've covered so far. So this is really why the Dermalux portfolio was built. Let me introduce you quickly to the systems. Each system is designed around the different clinical demands and the dosing requirements that we've now covered. So Flex is designed for the portability, including that home use certification, and it delivers that biologically relevant dose, but at a level that typically requires a more frequent treatment. You've then got the compact light that you see in the middle here. The compact light is a professional only system now. This is primarily designed for non-medical practitioners that are treating cosmetic indications, and its dosing capability allows the clinicians to achieve results in fewer sessions again now, reducing that time burden, whilst again maintaining the biological dose to make change. And then finally, the TriWave MD is the most versatile professional platform. It supports medically certified indications now, higher clinical demand. You can see more treatments, see more patients in the same time that you can see in other devices, and a broader range of treatment goals have been added, and again, remaining in that evidence-based dose window. So in practice, what that means then is you need fewer sessions, you get a stronger, earlier response, you get this greater clinical confidence, and then that visibility, you start to see that wow factor for patients much quicker as well. And I guess this is where protocols come in, and Pablo touched on that a moment ago. We've spent a lot of time working on the protocols, and we know that protocols are starting points. They're not end points, and we're going to cover that in a moment. Protocols matter. They protect our patients, they protect clinicians, but within the Dermalux systems, these protocols are supported by, preset protocols that are ready at your fingertips, that are designed to deliver accurate dosing every time. So we have protocols designed for all indications that you see. Remember, we are targeting the part of the cells within the body that almost all symptoms that are presented to us can be triggered by. So, the amount of treatments that we can offer really is endless. We have post-treatment protocols because we know that our cells if they do not have the energy or what they need for their output, then and for them to be able to recover from those trauma-driven treatments that we offer, then we know that recovery and outcomes can slow down, and we also know that this is where complications can rise as well. And we have specific indications for different protocols, specific protocols for different indications. So, for example, our acne protocol, which we got together a medical advisory board in the summer, and this now is an LED plan to take you from the very first lesion all the way through to maintenance, just using the power of light, which is incredible. So, they work because they are built around first the wavelength selection, these protocols. So different wavelengths interact with different chromophores. We've seen that now, and different tissue depths. So choosing the right light matters. The protocols cover that. The dose range, we now know too little, we don't see any activation of the target cell, and too much, we again don't see the result. So the protocol keeps us in that optimal biological window. And then we've got the treatment frequency, so biology responds to that repetition. But timing does matter, so spacing these treatments correctly supports that cumulative change without the overstimulation. And then finally, because we can control those things, we then have these expected outcomes. We can define really what could happen or what should happen, and when we need to adjust these protocols. And that gives us then that predictability of what those outcomes will look like. So these plans are designed to integrate with all the science, the engineering that we've just heard about. And this is important, this bit, with Dermalux, we can go further. Protocols are structured starting points, which is great, but clinical judgment is what really personalizes it. There is this hidden assumption that a lot of light-based treatments, that skin responds uniformly to light. But that is not the case. Skin is not a uniform organ. We know that. It varies in depth, in composition, in inflammatory state. It varies in the pigment, and it varies in metabolic activity as well. So this variability really does matter. And the Dermalux systems include these preset protocols based on the biology, based on everything that we've spoken about as well. And they give you that safe validation starting point. But the clinical practice, we know it isn't static. Patients change, inflammation shifts, healing evolves, and this is where you are also able to customize that treatment plan for your client. So you can adjust the dose, the parameter, again, while staying in that safe, optimized window. So you have the structure with Dermalux, but then you also have the control of how you utilize the system. And that really is what turns LED into this clinical platform that I talk about, and not just another light source. Advanced clinical practices now will understand why a protocol works, know when to adapt it, but then also recognize, that protocol needs to be modified. So the best place to go here for all that information is, of course, the Dermalux Academy. The Academy supports you in, knowing not just what to do, but why you're doing it. So whether you're following a protocol or you're customizing the treatment, you're always working in that evidence-based parameter. And that is why that consistency, that builds that confidence, better results, and you get better patient outcomes for the confidence for you in the teams as well, prescribing those protocols. So for those of you that are not on the Dermalux Academy, please jump on. If you're already a Dermalux partner, get on there. There's some incredibly valuable information for you to take your learning to the next level. For those that are new to Dermalux, want to find out more, we will give you access to the Academy. Slightly a little bit of a different access, but you will have access to all of the peer-led educational webinars that are on there, which take the basics to the very next level, and listen to other peers that are out there that are using it in a particular way. So I guess, what does this mean when we put it all together? When we are following the biology and we build the devices around that biology, outcomes become predictable, teams become more confident, patients trust the process much more. And when patients trust those outcomes, then LED technology, Dermalux, naturally becomes part of a long-term treatment plan. It's not a one-off session. It should never, ever be collecting dust in a treatment room. It should be used throughout everything that you're doing, and hopefully you can see that now. And this really is what it looks like when LED phototherapy is done properly. So I'm going to move on now, and we're going to take a look at some of the incredible questions that have come through. Everyone is super engaged for a Wednesday afternoon, and I love this. So Pablo, Ben, I know we're running out of time just slightly, but I'm going to pick out a couple of great questions. First week, I think we did cover this, but let's clarify again. Somebody has asked, what is the optimal distance from the skin? So I don't know, Pablo, did you want to answer that?
Okay, so the company has determined that 2.5 centimeters should be the perfect distance between the plastic of the head of the light emission diode and the skin. Each centimeter we go up, we need to multiply the time of exposure. So it's extremely important to be in a distance. We don't need to measure exactly 2.5, but around 2 to 3 centimeters, not more than 3 centimeters. So the time will be much more longer if the distance is just a bit higher. So if instead of 2.5 you put 3 or 4 centimeters, be sure you're gonna need much more time of exposure or much more energy in the device. In any case, it's no sense. So try to train your team to be as close as possible to the structure, to the area, to the anatomical area you want to treat. And this is the reason why TrueWave has this possibility to adapt to the face or even to the body areas like the arms or the legs, to be able to be at this specific distance of 2.5 centimeters.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Great answer. Helen has asked that she's had her device now for approximately 5 years. Does the efficiency reduce with age, Ben?
Not within a 5-year span. No, we, as I touched on, the thermal engineering that we put into the devices means that we're confident that those LEDs are running within a set thermal limit, and they shouldn't degrade within a 5-year window at all.
Yeah, perfect. Another question here for you, Dr. Pablo. It says, so it's from Sabrina. Hi, Sabrina. Dr. Pablo said that the exposure time during a session could be different for each patient. Is it good to change that depending on the presets for the TriWave? I think that's what the question says. So would you change those protocols based on, you've got the preset protocols that exist for each of the devices, but are you changing them and are you customizing them yourself?
So, of course, as you said, Melissa, the protocols are fixed protocols that works, but this is the minimum we need to apply to the patient. So the idea is this one. We are not going to apply the same time in a postmenopausal woman and in a premenopausal woman. The thickness of the skin is not the same. The thickness of the skin in a young boy of 15 years old who has an inflammatory process is not going to be the same as in his grandfather with 90 years old with a very, very thin skin. So thickness of the skin will determine the time of application. Rudeness of the tissue will determine also the time of application, because the higher is the rudeness, the more higher will be the reflection. So the phototype of the skin is not the same absorption in a phototype 1, 2 than in a phototype 5, 6, who need much more time of application. So as you see, there are many parameters that we need to take care. So we need to prepare many times the patient for the treatment. That means if the patient comes with a huge rudeness, it will be interesting to do some pre-treatment, like a non-reticulated hyaluronic acid in the area to have much more flat skin. If the patient has very thin skin layer, so it will be interesting also to stimulate this tissue before with another protocol. So if the patient has a very high phototype, we can consider to apply some blanching creams to decrease the time of application of the light emission diodes. That means the device works in any case, but we can multiply the efficacy if we take care of the skin condition and we prepare the patient for the treatment. This is not just something specific for light emission diode. We have this problem with any energy-based device we apply in the skin of our patient. So if we have a patient we want to treat with fractional radiofrequency, intraneedle fractional radiofrequency, who has too much vascularization, we're going to have a huge lack of efficacy on the treatment. So we need to decrease this vascularization with a vascular laser before treating with the fractional radiofrequency, intraneedle fractional radiofrequency. This is exactly the same situation of this device. So if we prepare the patient, we're going to obtain much better result. Just an example.
Perfect.
If the skin, we have a patient who has never received a treatment, to do a chemical peeling, soft chemical peeling, will be extremely interesting. If we hydrate the skin with a vapor of water, the absorption of the light emission diode will be much more higher. If we switch off the light of the room at the same time we are doing the treatment, the efficacy of the light will be much more higher, because we are not going to confuse the tissue with the light of the white light of the room and the one we are exposing with the light emission diode. So to switch off the light of the room is also extremely important. So we are so concerned about the interaction with the light in the room that we protected the windows, the rooms who have window with external exposure of light from outside of the clinic. We try to put those, I don't know how you call it, those bands of protection, not to have the interaction of the external light. So again, take care of the skin condition, take care of the specification, of the specificities of the area you want to treat, and you will obtain much better results in less number of sessions.
Love that added value there. Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go for 2 more questions now. Ben, there's a great question from Marvin, so I don't know if you can take a look at that and then prepare to answer that afterwards. There's a question that's specifically for you. Just while you're taking a look at that, Pablo, there's just been a couple of questions about pigmentation and LED phototherapy. So I wonder if you could cover that. I know that you've had incredible results with melasma and other types of treatments, so it'd be great to just hear your views quickly on really, how LED supports that. And I guess the questions are, can LED cause pigmentation?
So we can say LED doesn't cause pigmentation. This is 99.9% true. So it is true that if we apply a blue light in a very high phototype in an inflammatory process, we can create post-inflammatory pigmentation. But it's just in this case, blue light applied very long time in a very high phototype, like phototype 5, 6, with a certain level of inflammatory process or excess of vascularization. Evidently, this is not under the protocol of treatment by the company. So we are totally outside of the regular protocols. So if we except this situation, we can say light emission diodes and will never create pigmentation in the skin. Why it's so effective in pigmentation who combine melanin and hemoglobin? Because we are able to control both. We control with the red light the activity of the cell. When we have a melanocyte who is hyperactive, producing much more melanin than normal, we are going to under-regulate that. We are going to decrease the activity of the cell to come to a regular level. And we are going to control the vessels who are behind, who feed those cells to produce more amount of proteins, more amount of melanin. So we control the vascularization and we control the activity of the cell. A majority of the melasmas has both excess of vascularization and excess of activity of the cell. So this is the reason why it's so efficacious in pigmented lesion, because we control both the metabolism of the cell by the vessels who feed the cell and the activity of the cell to decrease this activation that has been excessive, probably due to the sun exposure or some cosmetic irritation, who create this excess of generation of pigment in the tissue, which is not normal.
Thank you so much. Ben, I don't know if you managed to get that question.
Yeah, no,
fantastic. I'll let you answer that now.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mervyn, for the question. So essentially, he's asked, why does the oblique angle of incidence make a difference, and how do we address that with our devices? And so the answer is quite simple, and I think Pablo kind of touched on it a minute ago. Really, is when light is interacting with kind of any surface, but obviously when we're talking about the skin, that there's always a degree of the three reactions. There's always be some light that reflects away, there'll be some light that kind of penetrates through and scatters, and some light will be absorbed. And so when we are looking at angle of incidence, we're trying to limit how much of that light will get reflected away off the surface. And more like the lower wavelength light, the higher frequency light will naturally reflect more, whereas the long wavelengths will reflect less. But still, the angle of incidence of the light, which is why we cone the light up at 30 degrees, makes a difference on like how much of that light will be reflected away. And so in terms of mechanically, how do we do that with the devices? You'll notice that nearly all of our devices, we have some degree of ability to kind of dome the device. And so when we look at the flex, we form a flexible dome, and those LEDs are, they're all kind of angling in towards the surface of the skin. So if you're laying there under your face and you've got it around you, all of those LEDs are designed to kind of, primarily try and orientate as best they can towards the skin. And similarly, when you look at the triode and the compact, we've got the head that can turn and tilt in. And what's quite interesting is that when you measure the power output from the surface of the device, and then you take a step back and you're inside that dome, you kind of get this interesting effect where we don't really follow the inverse square law perfectly well, because the light starts to kind of intersect, and you kind of, I tend to, when people ask me, it's like, as long as you're kind of within that kind of dome of light, you are going to be getting a really good dose. But in terms of kind of angle of incidence, that's how mechanically how we address it. We're trying to make sure those LEDs are orientated kind of perpendicular to the skin as best we can.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I feel like we could just keep going all night. We definitely can't do that. We always seem to overrun. I need to manage this better. But, I think we probably just need an hour of Q&As. That's what we'll do next. There's loads of really great Q&As, questions, that have come through. We won't have the time to answer them, but I will, and myself, and I'll send any over to Pablo. We will respond to them. I really appreciate the engagement that you've brought through, and thank you for all the thanks. And yes, the devices are available in many other countries, so thanks for those questions there. I will get back to absolutely everybody. Thank you so much, Ben and Dr. Pablo. As always, I love these sessions that we have together. I really, really appreciate it. For those of you that are watching now and we would love to hear from you. Please give us some feedback. Scan the QR code here. Let us know, what your feedback is on today's webinar. Ask us any other questions, or you can discover the Dermalux range and speak to one of our team. And remember that this session, you will always be able to watch this back through the Dermalux Academy. You should see that go live tomorrow morning now. So please do share with all of your teams as well. Thank you all again for joining. Thank you so much for our speakers, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Take care.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.